Welcome to our extended coverage of the Noor Salmon trial here on clickorlando.com. Thanks for joining us. I'm Matt Austin. 60 potential jurors. That's how many the judge wants in the Noor Salmon trial by tomorrow. So far, 92 people have been questioned for the final trial. 47 of those are now in the jury pool. Let's get you to News 6 investigator Lewis Bolden. Lewis, we saw more dismissals today than people put in the potential jury pool, right?
That's right, Matt. And there was one potential juror who was particularly memorable. He was a military man, spent an entire career in the military, and basically said that he doesn't understand why Salmon is being tried in a civilian court as opposed to a military tribunal. He went on to say that he views her as a terrorist. And that sort of sent a gasp throughout the courtroom. But needless to say, there was a short meeting after that, and he was dismissed after that. And he was particularly memorable. I want to bring in News 6 legal analyst Whitney Bone today. Whitney, when you hear something like that, I mean, is there any chance that someone who says something like that is going to remain on the jury?
Well, I mean, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube once it's out. And so once something like that has come out and you've said that you have prejudged this woman without hearing any evidence in the case, you're not suitable to be a juror on this trial. Again, it doesn't make them a bad person or anything. And really, as lawyers and as the court, we want people to be honest when they're prospective jurors about how they feel, because we don't want them withholding that and then it coloring the verdict in the end if they make it on the jury. So certainly, you know, that's not something that I anticipate that you would hear frequently from prospective jurors in the trial, but the fact that he said it, yes, that would per se make him inappropriate as a juror because he's already decided he thinks she's guilty.
You know, this is such a big case, and a lot of people, there's been so much news coverage about it since it happened, and a lot of people said that they have seen a lot of that coverage, but they could set aside everything that they've read and they've seen on TV and be impartial. As an attorney, when you're trying to weed through that process, are you concerned with whenever people say, oh yes, I've seen a lot of material, but I can be partial, I can set all of that aside?
Yes, of course we're concerned because for one thing, I mean, you don't know what that person saw in terms of if it was information that was correct or not, or if it was from a reputable news source, or even if they saw something that arguably was correct, if that information was something they retained in a way that it was correctly retained in terms of their perception of what they heard. You know, and certainly the decision should be made by the jurors based on the evidence they hear in the trial and based upon the law as Judge Byron instructs them to apply it. It shouldn't be based on things that they hear elsewhere that are incomplete and could be speculative or incorrect or misperceived.
You mentioned reputable news sources. We heard one potential juror today who said that he had seen a lot of news reports about it, but then he said that he saw a lot of posts on Facebook. Once the judge sort of drilled down on exactly what he had seen, it wasn't actual news reports. He said he saw a lot of people posting about it on Facebook.
I think a lot of people get their information that way in part or some in whole, you know, in terms of you know, there's a level of trust and reliance in shared information on social media sometimes for some people.
And you have said that women are going to play an important role in this trial. Talk about that.
Well, I mean, the defendant is a woman, and she is accused of a crime that is based largely, in my opinion, on circumstantial evidence, in terms of that meaning the government may not have direct evidence that she knew or encouraged Omar Mateen to do any component part of this crime, but that, you know, that information is largely based upon a premise that the government has even outlined in their trial brief they filed before trial, that she is married to this man. So certainly as a woman juror, I think, and that doesn't mean male jurors can't understand some of these issues too, but as a woman juror, I think a woman would be in a more specific position to be able to perhaps understand what that might mean in terms of a relationship with your husband, and maybe be somewhat sympathetic to the fact that just because a woman is married to someone who does bad things, it doesn't mean that she's guilty of doing bad things.
We had a potential juror today who was a victim of domestic violence. She was actually a witness for the state in her own case.
Yes.
And she was on the stand, so to speak, for quite a while. And
Yes.
the judge had a number of questions about her. She remained in the jury pool.
I heard her.
How do you think, so she was not dismissed.
No.
Do you think she could be impactful? Do you think her previous experience could make her more impactful as a juror?
Well, I mean, in terms of any of these individual jurors, certainly, we don't know what's going through their minds, and we don't know that much in terms of the extent something like that woman having experienced domestic violence in her own life with her ex-fiance, could have on her ability to handle things as she moves throughout the trial. All of these questions at this point, keep in mind, are being asked of these jurors without them knowing the evidence, because that's how this works. You don't get to know the evidence before you're a juror in the case. So, I mean, the best that the court can do is try to find people that are fair and impartial prior to the trial, and then rely upon that information and trying to find jurors who can serve on this jury and actually be fair and impartial to both sides, the government and Ms. Salmon, throughout the trial.
And we know that possible abuse may be part of Salmon's defense.
Certainly.
So would that juror play an important part for the defense?
Absolutely. I mean, all of the jurors play an important part for the defense, but and it's not necessarily fair to assume that because someone was a victim of domestic violence that they're going to not be able to view the case in the same way as somebody else. But at the same time, certainly I think that the dynamics of domestic violence, and I'm a criminal defense attorney, but I do a lot of victims advocacy and represent a lot of victims of domestic violence as well. There are a lot of dynamics of domestic violence that I don't think are very pervasively understood in society by everybody. And so if you are in a unique position where you experience that, you might have a better ability to understand that defense as it's put in front of you.
Would that be someone the government would want to strike?
Maybe, maybe not. In terms of, I can only speculate what their decisions might be in terms of who they would want on the jury or not want on the jury. I would think that would certainly play a role if I was one of the government attorneys in terms of perhaps I wouldn't want that person to be on there because I don't know enough about what that experience meant to her and how that might affect her once she hears the testimony and the evidence in the trial.
The judge is trying to get to a pool of 60 people. I believe we're somewhere around 47, 48 right now. We've got tomorrow to go. Does it look like we're on track? If we get to 60 people tomorrow, does it look like we're on track to start by Wednesday, as the judge has said?
It appears that way. I mean, this is trials, and I've been a trial attorney for 14 years practicing criminal defense, and the one thing I can say is you can never anticipate everything that's going to happen in a trial. So, these are human variables. There's a lot of moving parts. There's things that could impact the scheduling of this that we just couldn't even really foresee at this point, related to jurors or elsewhere, or other issues. But it certainly seems like that's a reasonable goal in terms of us getting to a place where we're starting opening statements and arguments and moving into the evidentiary portion of this trial next week.
And I just have a couple more questions for you. This is federal court, which is much different from state court. Will the attorneys, so far the judge has done all of the questioning of the potential jurors. Once we get to the 60, will the attorneys then have an opportunity to question those jurors?
I don't believe that's what's going to happen in this trial. You're right. In state court, usually the way, and every judge in state court's a little bit different, but usually the attorneys for both sides, the state attorney in state court and the defense attorney, get to ask questions, even if the judges ask questions. In federal court, it's a lot more structured in terms of the judge pre-approves questions that are submitted by both parties, maybe where they've conferred and tried to agree about questions they think are appropriate together or not, if they can reach any agreement about that. If they can't, the judge is the ultimate arbiter in terms of what questions are going to be asked or not asked, but the questions typically go through the judge. That doesn't mean that there might not be certain unique situations where things could in theory happen differently, but I wouldn't anticipate that happening in this trial.
Okay. Whitney Bone, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
So the judge is, again, hoping for a pool of 60 people and hoping to start this trial on next Wednesday. Of course, we're going to keep following it. Matt, we're going to send it back to you in the studio.
All right, guys, thank you. Our coverage of this trial continues online tonight. We have a special page detailing everything on clickorlando.com/Noor-Salmon tab. And don't forget, we have a team of reporters in the courtroom for the latest. Head to twitter.com/News6 Pulse Trial And you can join us tomorrow for another discussion. Our coverage begins at 8:30 right here on clickorlando.com.